Okay, I think it's starting, but we'll verify before we jump into it. Hold on. Hey, everybody, it's Uncle Grumpy. Welcome to Grumpy Tonight, Grumpy's Corner. What is it? It's kind of middle of the day. Grumpy early dinner.
Sure.
Anyway, we're here with our friend, Dr. Pasternack. Hang on a second here. I'm going to make sure we get everything right. And we're going to discuss a meeting that we're having on Monday and a video we're going to do with Ryan Kiesel, one of the authors of 820 from the Yes on 820 camp. He's going to sit down and we're going to ask him all the questions that we're seeing online, the concerns people have about what they think is going to happen if we pass this program, and what happens if we don't pass this program. We're just going to talk to Ryan and see, get it from him exactly what his intention was with this particular bill and the language in it. So Lawrence, why don't you say hi to everybody? And I think I'm going to share this to a couple of rooms while we're here.
Well, hello, everybody. We only have a couple people watching so far, but we just got started. And I guess I sort of think that sort of the main issue is just that Chris is announcing that there's going to be another Facebook Live with Ryan Kiesel. And so this is kind of just making people aware of it and maybe just talking about a few general things concerning 820.
Yeah, we are going to go, so everybody knows, we are going to talk about 820 as well as he said, get our questions ready for Ryan. So all right, Lawrence, I know you wrote what I think is a really good explanation of what happens if 820 passes or doesn't pass. I've shared that quite a few times because, again, I think it's a pretty simple explanation. I'd like us to go over that, if you don't mind. Would you tell us a little bit about what you think happens if 820 passes?
Can I sort of just in general, I think that the real lived experience for people who consume cannabis in our state, the real lived experience is if you want to have a card, you can still have a card, and you go into a dispensary and you buy whatever you want to buy at a 7% excise tax. If you don't want to get a card, you can go into a dispensary and buy whatever you want to buy and pay 15% excise tax. And I think that the only difference for just about anybody out there will be whether they pay 7 or 15%. There's no reason to think that, as you have in Colorado and some other states, 2 different types of dispensaries and 2 different supply chains and so on. Now, some medical dispensaries may, for one reason or another, say they're not selling to anybody without a card. They could do that, of course, if they want. But I had this conversation earlier with a journalist, in fact, and they said, why won't there be 2 different supply chains here in Oklahoma? And I think the answer to that is, first of all, there's nothing in 820 that would indicate that there would be 2 different supply chains. It's nothing in there to do that. But the reason why there's 2 different supply chains in some but not all states is because in most states, they start off with a very small medical marijuana program that's tailored to specific qualifying conditions. And they produce a product line in light of that customer base. But here in Oklahoma, no qualifying conditions. And so all the stuff that anybody would want is already there in the dispensaries. So it's not as if you have a small niche market and then you add rec. What we have now is catering to whatever anybody wants in our state. So there's no reason why there would be 2 separate inventories. The inventory that we have now is the inventory that the people broadly who use cannabis in our state want.
Yeah, that is one of the things we've seen implied online is that there's going to be two supply chains.
Yeah.
That's just, it wouldn't fit. I mean, it would be, there's no reason for it. Like you said, there's no language in there implying that that will happen, right?
Yeah, there's no language that, the language in 820 actually says that the two sets of regulations are supposed to be the same, except insofar as there's an explicit statutory reason to separate them. Like, if 820 passes, then you won't need a card. You'll only need proof that you're 21 or older. So there could be there'll be a statute that basically says, in order to buy cannabis, you either have to have a medical marijuana patient card, or government issued photo ID with proof that you are 21 or older. And so the regulations might reflect those two different options for identification, but only if there's something in statute that distinguishes between medical and non-medical would there then be a regulation.
Okay, so
Chris, your
can't
microphone
think-
is very, very buzzy.
so what's that?
Your microphone is all zappy buzzy.
Really? Well, I'm not sure what to say about that.
Just
Well, I don't have it. Look, I don't have it pulled up in front of me right now, but would you again go over what else you said will happen if this, let's go over what you've said you think might happen if it doesn't pass.
if it doesn't pass,
Yeah, what do you think happens if it doesn't pass? I know what I think happens. Let's just touch on that for a minute while I pull up
so
your notes.
two things. One is in the Oklahoma Constitution, it's Article 5, Section 6. What that says is if an initiative petition fails at the ballot, then it cannot be brought to the ballot again for 3 years, unless the proponents can get 25% of legal voters in the state to sign to get it earlier. So that would mean 1 million signatures to get it on the ballot until those 3 years go by.
Okay, so does that mean there's no way to do another cannabis petition for 3 years, or does it just mean it has to be so different? And then what happens then? Does it goes state Supreme Court, I think?
So I read case law on this. I read some state Supreme Court decisions. There was an instance back around 1980 where there was an initiative petition pertaining to alcohol that failed. And then they resubmitted it with various changes. And the Supreme Court said no, that the basic point of that constitutional provision is that if the same goals, the same aims, are in a new petition, they have to wait 3 years. So if you change the wording, if you organize it differently, if you add different things and subtract things, if it's similar enough. And so my thought is, and of course, somebody could always try and bring it to court, but my thought is take the provision, cannabis would be legal to be sold in Oklahoma to any person 21 and older. That's the kind of the heart of what 820 is. And so there can't be another petition that would have that in it until 3 years go by.
Okay, just looking at some of what I've got down here, remind us what happens to somebody under 21 without a card that gets caught with cannabis should 820 pass?
Right. So right now, anybody, under 21, older than 21, under 18, over 18, whatever, anybody without a card is subject to a criminal charge. It'll be criminal possession, a misdemeanor possession charge if you have cannabis without a card. That's the law right now. What 820 does is, obviously, if you're 21 and older, you don't need a card. If you're under 21 and you don't have a card, still, it's not a criminal charge. The options will be, if you are under 21 and don't have a card, then you can pay, I think it's $100 fine, or you could take like a 4-hour class in drug education, or see a counselor about drugs. And the idea behind it is, if you're 14 years old and you're caught with pot or whatever, then they're looking to find some way to address that other than saddling a 14-year-old with a criminal charge. Now, if you're between 18 and 21, at 18, you can go get a patient card without your parents' permission. So I presume that's what would happen at the age of 18. If somebody wants to use cannabis, they would get a medical card. They don't need their parents' permission. And then at 21, they don't need the card at all. But effectively, what 820 does is it avoids saddling anybody with a criminal charge for possession.
Okay. Well, we're certainly going to ask Ryan all this again, Ryan Kiesel, Monday, as well as a lot of other questions, but I appreciate you addressing it while we're here. And I would like you to also, if you don't mind, because I know you've had this conversation in depth, like you to address the issue of people who are on probation and parole, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So right now, people, if they use cannabis, then they might be considered violating probation or parole. That's really at the discretion of the probation officer and the judge. So, you might have a forward-looking probation officer that's okay with it, but overwhelmingly in our state, if you use cannabis and they randomly drug test people on parole and probation, then that will typically be a violation and you'll be returned to jail. That's the way it is now. 820 protects people. It explicitly says if you're on parole or probation, then the use of cannabis, the presence of THC in your system, shall not be a basis for the revocation of your parole or probation.
Okay. Well, I guess that covers that part, right? I mean, the judge or the probation officer or parole officer, I guess they're going to have to accept it, or what?
Right. It'll be the law. It's basically, if you had a banana in your pocket, you don't go back to jail, right? And so if you have cannabis in your pocket, you don't go back to jail. It effectively says that, there is no difference in law between cannabis and a banana with respect to any state level prosecution, right? Within our state. Like if you are in a federal court, right, if federal law applies, but at any state level, right, state level court, county court, and so on, then they're subject to that law.
Well, personally, I think that's one of the best parts about 820. I really do, because we know, according to public defenders, people are getting their probation and parole revoked on a regular basis. And we know that the Department of Corrections sent out that letter last year, or maybe 2 years ago, stating a card would no longer be a reason to not get locked back up. So that's some really good news. It really is. All right. What other parts you want to address about this? Oh, they can't use the smell for search and seizure, right?
Right. So another thing is that right now, even if you have a patient card, there was a court decision on this. Law enforcement can use it as probable cause for a discretionary search if they smell cannabis, right, on your person, in your home, on your vehicle, whatever. If they can detain you and search you, even if you're a card holder, for cannabis right now. And 820 stops that. It explicitly says, right, the presence of cannabis, the appearance of cannabis, the smell of cannabis shall not be the basis for detaining or searching someone.
We have people in the community that I've spoken to where they've been pulled over, and the issue in the car, the smell, and what turns into getting arrested or ticketed or whatever, is then followed up by a warrant for their house where they come search their house. Right. And it all started with that we smell cannabis or we smell weed or whatever.
Yeah. In other states, if you look at the data, the people who wrote 820 have written more than half of all the cannabis legislation around the country. They do it differently by each state to tailor it to what they think is appropriate for that state. They poll it, they get input. And in the other states where they have this language as well, protecting people from police search, you see massive drops in police discretionary searches, especially among persons of color, after something like this passes. Like, the data is out there to show how effective it is.
So what do you think about just to go a little sideways here, what do you think about the arguments that the formal no camp is putting out? Not the Facebook stuff, but the formal no camp, the one I understand is run by former Governor Keaton.
Yeah. So Keating. And
Keating?
so,
okay.
yeah, from Keating. And so, they present themselves, I think they've named their group Protect Children from Marijuana, Vote No on 820 or something like that. And so I've been sent some of their materials and I've been asked to respond to some of those materials. And like, for instance, they'll say that, look, children are, young children are getting their hands on gummies and whatnot and ending up in the ER. That's one of the things that they talk about. And so, in fact, there is, give or take, a 10-fold increase in pediatric exposure, persons under 18, or just broadly speaking, for medical pediatric exposure to cannabis, resulting in poison control contacts, ER visits, and so on. There's a 10-fold increase. That's completely true. But what they don't tell you is that it went from 0.02% of all contacts with poison control to 0.36% of poison control contacts. So 99.64% of all pediatric poison control contacts are for kids eating pencils or dishwasher pods or whatever it is. 99.64% is not cannabis. It happens so enormously infrequently. And that's national data, both state and national, I've looked at, that it's not an argument to say we ought not allow cannabis because children are getting their hands on it. It happens basically only one out of 300 cases having to do with poison control contacts. The other 299 cases are, everything else: ibuprofen, dishwasher pods, alcohol, pencils, toys, right? Cleaning solutions, ant baits, all the other things that kids might get their hands on. So no doubt about it, you don't want to put kids at risk, but it's not anywhere near a significant enough issue to legislate around it, as I see it, other than, of course, child-proof packaging and education.
Now, don't we have a child-proof packaging thing now?
Yeah, I'm not really sure how good it is. Like, you evaluate some of that packaging. Some of it, like, even adults can't open. It's like some of it is
some of the stuff that was in this industry a year or two ago, I remember getting, and I just go straight for the scissors because with my arthritis and my bad thumb and everything, I can't do. It's too difficult. So
right, but now here's the problem: once you do the scissors, there's no more childproofing. So, frankly, one of the reasons why there are these pediatric exposures is because the person who has purchased the cannabis, the parent or whatever, leaves it around in a condition that the children can get at. And
well, now let's be straight. There's no kids in my house, so let's make that clear. Right. No kids here.
Yeah.
All right. So what else are they saying? What else is the official no camp saying that you can think of?
They're saying that schools will not be allowed to punish kids for having cannabis. It's just utterly false. It's totally made up. If you are 13 years old in middle school or whatever, and the school presumably has a no drug policy, they could suspend you, they could expel you, whatever their rules are, right? 820 doesn't change that in any way.
So at best, So at best, maybe it's a little harder for the school to end up causing you a criminal record.
Yeah, the only difference is at the level of a court, right? A
Well, I
court.
can tell, look, hold on. I can tell you right now, we have, okay, not long ago dealt with this particular issue. We had somebody in the community whose child got in trouble at school, and the school not only wanted to suspend this child, this teenager, but they called the police, and then they had to go to court. And we were lucky enough to be able to, they got a lawyer and have cleaned that up a bit. But the school was doing everything they could to amplify the issue because they found her with a pipe in her pocket that another kid had told the teacher or whatever that she had a pipe in her pocket. Next thing she knows, she's suspended from school, and then she's also getting arrested.
Right. You know, what the fundamental thing that drives this petition is criminal justice reform, right? You know, new approach, the people that are donating it. This is, you know, they try to legalize cannabis, they try to legalize psilocybin, they tried to decriminalize drugs like, you know, in Oregon. They've had bills to restore voting rights for felons. Their entire mission basically is to end the war on drugs and its damage.
Yeah. Well, what else is the no camp saying? Anything you can think of that makes
Yeah,
any sense?
they've talked about how it's going to increase violence and so on. That you know, drug legalizing cannabis is going to increase violence in our state. And it's like you look around the country, wherever drugs are legalized, the rates of violence go down, the rates of crime go down, right? Overall, right? Because if you're not disenfranchised because of having a criminal charge, thus you're not able to get a job, and thus you have to turn to crime. By removing that causality, right, which is, you know, one of the fundamental problems with this country, by removing that, keeping people employable because they don't have a drug charge, then you're going to have less crime and you're going to have less violence. But the other thing too is that look at all the violence that arises from street level drug dealers and from, you know, people that are supplying drugs and, you know, territory battles. You know, so much violence around this country has to do with that. And again, if there's no longer, you know, street drug dealers dealing cannabis and everything else, you're not going to have as much violence in our society.
So I think that everybody knows that the black market's flooded right now. I happen to know it's flooded, and mostly what I know it's flooded with is legally grown cannabis. 820 opens up the door so everybody can walk in there. Do you, like me, do you believe that will get a lot of people to not buy it on the black market, and that'll also give those legal growers who are feeding the black market, it will give them a way to sell it legally, and that they'll maybe move less of it through the black market? Do you see it cutting back on the black market like that? I do.
Well, you know, even where there's legalization, there's still a black market. We see that around the country. That the legalization doesn't get rid of the black market, it shrinks it, but it doesn't get rid of it. And so long as, right, our federal government continues to prohibit cannabis, continues to have, you know, draconian tax regulations, making, you know, businesses have to mark up heavily, as long as we have heavy taxes, then there'll be a black market. You know, it would be lessened out of 820 for sure, right? But I don't know, but honestly, I don't know by how much, because if you don't have to go through the same testing, if you don't have to mark it up as much through retail, if you don't have the overhead of retail, if you don't have to charge taxes on it, and cannabis is cheaper, people are going to buy from a cheaper source. So it'll somewhat affect the black market.
But the way I think, look,
I'm not sure it's going to have a huge effect on the black market.
Okay, well, let me detail it a little bit. I think that the passage will allow growers to get money for their product in the dispensaries that they can't get now.
Yeah, sure.
And so, you know, look, I understand we're not going to stop the black market. Fine, I get it. But we can slow it down by at least making it easier for people to stay in the legal market. Make it as easy as possible to stay in the legal market.
Right.
Most of these growers I'm talking about, most of this cannabis I'm seeing in the black market was grown legally. So they're already in the legal market. They just are growing more than they can sell because the stores don't have enough customers.
Right.
I think this gives them a way to boost their business like they want. I believe that's what they want. I believe most of them that are doing this to survive.
Yeah.
I don't think they're doing it because they like to feed the black market. Now, there's some that are always going to do that, and as you said, but I believe that some are being backed into a corner and maybe doing things that they might not otherwise do. And I see this as a help to that. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a matter of degree, though. So it's, I don't have a clear sense of what percentage of sales are the black market. I've looked at the data in other states, and what you see is that black markets shrink after legalization. We have that data from other states. Doesn't eliminate the black market, but it shrinks the black market. And so, I'm just going to guess here. Let's say 25% of all sales in Oklahoma are black market. That's just a guess. I have no idea. It might shrink it from 25% to 12%. I don't know. Right? I really don't know specifically here in Oklahoma because we are different than other states, right? We have such an open medical program. And, it'll be just 8% more in tax. The overhead won't be as high here as in, say, California, where property values are much, much higher, and thus the cost of doing business is much, much higher. So the difference in price between buying out of a dispensary versus buying in the black market, the less of a difference there is in that price, the less there is of a black market. It's not worth it for people, right? To risk, criminal charges. If you are a grower and you could only, make an extra 10% by selling in the black market, but you'd lose your license if you get caught, how worthwhile is that?
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I think that will help. I hate to say it, but I've also heard about stores that will penny discount stuff off the books to sell, we'll say, out the back door. That's black market. So they can survive. Right. So maybe, and I feel like, as somebody who just goes in to buy stuff, if I'm there, the prices I think are a little high compared to what they're paying. I think the markup is insane in this industry. Now, I'm not in this industry, so I understand. Maybe I don't know everything, but a more than 100% markup on products seems to be hurting business, in my opinion, because people can turn to the black market, where if they can get more than a dozen people in the store throughout the day, they don't have to take those shortcuts. They don't have to try and make every penny off of every person that walks in the door. I mean, and most of them are just good people trying to survive in business. Mm-hmm. 820, I think, helps us because the stores have more business and they can in turn make less money off of each one of us that walks through the door, saving us money. What do you think?
With greater volume, there's greater pricing efficiency. Absolutely. And so, when I wonder how much of a difference there's going to be in terms of sales of 820 passes, one of my thoughts is that, location is always vital to any business. And so I think overwhelmingly the bulk of the sales that would come out of 820 would be the new sales that would come out of 820 would be people from Texas and so on, right? So if you're in a dispensary near a border on a major highway in parts of Tulsa, Oklahoma City, that gets a lot of foot traffic and people coming in from other states and so on, there's going to be, a massive increase, right? It might be doubling our total sales, more than doubling our total sales for our state, very much because of people from North Texas. In terms of in the state, we already basically sell to everybody who wants cannabis in the state now. with a few qualifications, right? The black market example, obviously, the more of the black market we can get into the dispensaries, the more the dispensaries are making money. But there are other things too that, if I were a dispensary owner, then I'd be asking myself what I could do if 820 passes to increase my sales, because every other dispensary is looking right at maybe getting a little bit more sales. I hear dispensary owners say people just kind of wander in, they think they could buy cannabis and they find that they can't because of a card. And so there's going to be some people that are kind of just not really into it, that don't bother to get a card, that just might want to try it. They've not used it since they were 19 or whatever. And there'll be some of those, and then you could potentially build a customer base of those people. So you try to market to people, you try to figure out, the baby boomers and so forth, to kind of, advertise in a way to try to get certain niche clientele in. Another one is senior citizens, right? Provide ointments and so on for senior citizens. They're not going to get a card, but if you told them that, a THC ointment could help with their arthritis, provide an opportunity for them to try it. And if they like it, then, you maybe get a customer out of it. So
yeah, it could be difficult for a retired person on Social Security to get a card to be able to buy a $20 ointment to help their arthritis, because now they're over $100 into it already.
Right. They would need to know that it works. And so, tiny little sample packets, like if it's $1, right? Come on in, it's like a penny or $1 or whatever. You try a little sample, you try it on your arms or whatever, or see if it helps. If it helps, then you buy more. And so all those kinds of opportunities open up with 820, right? All these new marketing opportunities are created. And so, an ambitious dispensary owner should be thinking about, what new marketing plans will I have if 820 passes?
Okay, well, I don't want to get off here without addressing what we think might happen if it fails, as far as the capital goes. In your opinion, what if it fails? I've talked about this before. We have a governor who has made a point to say that the people didn't know what they voted for. He's never said anything good about the program, and $60 million in tax money is a drop in the bucket when we have a $10.4 billion budget for this year. So what do you think is going to happen if this fails?
I think one of the reasons why he scheduled the vote for March 7th was to hope that there'd be bad turnout. So I think he set it up hoping that it to increase the chances that it will fail. I think that their preference is that it would fail. Ideologically, they don't support cannabis and they don't like the current program. And when I've looked at the media and when I've looked at what people are saying from like the anti-cannabis folks out there, which represent 40%, give or take, of this state, right? Some people are on the fence, right? But we have a pretty solid population of people that are against cannabis here. 43% said no to 788. That they don't like what we have now. They just think about 820 as more of what we have now. That's their perspective. They don't like cannabis in society. They see it as a harmful, addictive, dangerous drug that ruins people's lives. That's the way they see it. And they're going to come out and vote no. There's going to be church sermons that Sunday and so on. Go out, vote no, protect the children, etc. They're going to be the ones going to the ballots. And if right, they get a better turnout, and this is going to be turnout driven. If they get a better turnout and 820 fails, then the way that's going to be read, I think, by our legislature is this was a referendum on cannabis in our state.
To add to that, I just received from a friend up in Yukon that there's a church up there that has a big vote no banner hanging outside the church.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
They're going to
passing. Yeah.
They're going to do it. They think this is their chance to undo what we did.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's exactly the way they see it.
you know, the one thing I can get legislators to agree on at the Capitol is the reaction when I say, what happens if 820 fails? And they all just shake their head and say, oh, that's not good. That's the one thing they all agree on, that the governor will come after it, and that some of them are holding their breath on bills right now, waiting on that vote, and that will determine how those bills lean and whether or not they get support.
Senate Bill 439 was meant to introduce qualifying conditions into our program and end telemed. So basically, you'd have to have an established ongoing relationship with a doctor to write a recommendation, and there would be qualifying conditions, and we don't even know what those qualifying conditions are, because if that bill passes, then it directs OMA to set up the qualifying conditions. And that bill made it through committee, but under an amendment that it only applies to persons under 18. If 820 passes, I wouldn't be surprised if it gets modified again and then creates qualifying conditions for everybody. I could be wrong, obviously, I'm guessing, but it's that kind of thing that I imagine would happen this year and next year if 820 passes. And like I said before, if 820 fails, 3 years have to go by before another initiative petition legalizing cannabis.
And as far as industry, okay, he doesn't have to like shut down the businesses. They have a moratorium on any new licensure.
Right.
So all they have to do is shrink that number of customers even more. It's
Right.
already stretched so thin because we have so many businesses. All they got to do is shrink that a little bit more. And over the next 2-3 years, everybody fails, except for a couple of big ones.
Our state wanted to have only 15 dispensaries here, right? They only wanted
Forgot about that.
dispensaries, right? And they wanted to require that there's a pharmacist at every dispensary, right?
Right.
That were all the things that they had planned if 788 passed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't know, like, I don't know how severe it's going to get. You know, but there'll be ongoing pressure to shrink this program, to turn it into the kind of program you see in Minnesota and so on. Minnesota's about to go full access, by the way. 21 states have fully legalized cannabis. There's about 4 more states that are likely to legalize it this year. Half the country will likely go rec this year. And if our bill fails, all these other states are moving forward, positioning themselves for if and when the federal government changes, and we'd be pushing ourselves back against that. That's what I see the story is. I see 820 from the perspective of the No campaign as a referendum on cannabis in our state. And nationally, I think the narrative would be, if 820 fails, well, the whole legalization movement is out of steam. It failed in Arkansas, it failed in the Dakotas, now it failed in Oklahoma. That's it nationally. They realized gone too far, and so much for any federal change. Like I could be exaggerating, this is kind of hyperbolic, I admit it, but that's just the way I feel.
It's what I see playing out politically. And if you just think about the politics of Oklahoma, again, we have a governor. I don't know if we talked about this. I've said it so many times today. We have a governor who terms out and wants to be the VP or a cabinet member of the DeSantis camp when he runs for president. So if it fails and he can squash the program somehow or hurt the program, like Lawrence has said, weed is bad, got to hurt weed, it's bad. If he can do that, that helps him with the far right. So we have to keep that in mind. That's going to be bad. We also have almost every one of our leadership in House and Senate terming out as well, and all jockeying for what their next election is going to be. I mean, I don't know any of them who have come out in favor of anything that I'm in favor of lately. They seem to be leaning farther and farther to the right, again, because of the other politics involved. Cannabis isn't important to them. It's the other politics. It's the next job. That's what's important. An 820 fail, they can use to help launch them into the farther right stratosphere, wherever that is. Do you think?
I think that they see the legalization of cannabis, even medically, as a win for the left. And they build up their trophies for their right-leading ideology by doing things to harm the left.
Got to own the libs. It's all about owning the libs. It's not about what's right or wrong for the people.
They see America's downfall as the 1960s. And they want to undo everything from the 1960s. They've undone Roe v. Wade from 72, right? They want to undo the sexual revolution. They want to undo the place of drugs in society. They want to undo, right, everything that's associated with that culture. And so their 820 basically is a referendum. Is our state going to be one that will be ideologically trying to go back to the 1950s? Or will our state be one that, at least as I see it, is based upon reason and evidence? The war on drugs has not changed drug use. It's just created criminal enterprises and destroyed people's lives.
I see we still have quite a few people watching. I don't know if they've been coming in or out or what, but I want to remind everybody what we've been talking about, what we see as the pros of 820, and talking about what to ask. Well, we're asking you, tell us what you'd like to hear us ask Ryan Kiesel on Monday from the 820 camp. So that's the plan. We will be live with him on Monday. I haven't set the time yet. I think it'll probably be around lunchtime, probably up at the Capitol, because we've got some other stuff to do there that same day. So, but for those of you that are watching, if you missed any of it, go back and you'll hear what we think about this. But that's the goal here, is just let everybody know to send us your questions. Tell us what you think we need to find out, address your fears about what you think is going to happen. Most of what we're seeing online is fear-based or perhaps profit-based. I'm not sure, but it's a mess. So we're trying to answer some of those questions. Lawrence, I haven't read any of the comments. I can't, I'm dyslexic, so I can't do both. But so I don't know if anybody's had any questions on here. If you even want to look at them, I'm going to go through them all when we're done and address everything I can.
One thing I just want to add that comes to mind is a lot of people feel like it's going to open the door to big businesses and so on. There's nothing in 820 that favors big or small business. There's nothing in 820 that basically sets things up to favor a big or a small business. It'll be a larger market, right? It'll be a larger market. So there'll be, businesses that are looking at that larger market that otherwise wouldn't be. Sure, that'll be the case. But in Colorado, for instance, 5 years after legalization, almost all the dispensaries were still sole proprietor. That, the number, this was in an article in Marijuana Business Daily, it was like only 9% of ownership of dispensaries, only 9% of them own more than 3 dispensaries. So overwhelmingly, all the dispensaries were either standalone or maybe they had an extra location somewhere.
I think we should also tell everybody, we spent some time with a reporter from DC recently, and he does nothing but cannabis all over the country. And he laughed and said, there is no big cannabis business that's waiting to pounce on Oklahoma, that we have too many licenses, and they don't want any part of the industry here. So there's not a bunch of people sitting outside across the border waiting to pounce.
Yeah, I'm looking at somebody who's saying this is all just smoke being blown about parole and probation. Parole and probation is federal. That's just not true.
Right.
That there's federal courts, federal crimes, and then there's state. And so we have state laws that govern parole and probation for state level offenses. it's just not true.
Okay. All right. Well, we're gonna wrap it up then. And we'll get to the comments.
Yeah, somebody also says Leo can't use the smell as probable cause. Yeah, they can. And there was a recent case of a patient card holder who had some cannabis visually observable that became the basis then for a search. So law enforcement can use it as the basis. They frequently do use it as the basis for search.
And as I was saying, that search of your car can then be followed up with a search of your house. All right. So, yeah, okay, I see some of those comments now. Yeah. All right. Anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
My thought is this is going to be driven by turnout, and people who feel like I don't really know which way to vote, I'm just not going to vote. That's why that greatly increases the risk of its failure. And I just think that everybody should be wary about what our legislature is already priming itself to do. We can already see it in the bills already filed against our medical program now, what their aspirations are. And so, what will happen? I don't know. But it's hard to imagine that the failure of 820 will not drive more severe treatment of our program.
Whereas the passage could allow us to do things like in time, get the taxes dropped on the patients and other things that make this an actual medical program instead of the joke that it is now.
Yep. Yep.
That sounds like a good idea.
Yeah. For me, I think the issue is we need to end the war on drugs. It's a disaster that has destroyed millions of lives. And 820 is just the particular battlefield that we're in. There's 50 states. We're in this one particular state. And we have to make a decision whether or not we want to sit on our hands and let that war continue, or do what we can when we can to say no to that war.
Oklahoma doesn't need to be the place the national cannabis movement comes to die. That's for sure. It doesn't need to be. I'm worried it might be, but it doesn't need to be. All right. So like we said, we're going to be talking to Ryan Kiesel from the 820 camp on Monday. Send us your questions, your fears, your concerns, whatever they are. Please try and keep it respectful. We all know Facebook's been a bit of a mess lately. I'm not even going to address any of that on here. I'm just going to wish everybody a good night, tell you all to stay grumpy, and see you on the road. That work?
Yep. Bye.
All right. Good night, guys.